She said I was just a phase and needed someone with actual ambition who wasn't embarrassed to admit what her boyfriend does for work. I found out at my best friend's housewarming party that the woman I'd planned to propose to that night had been lying to everyone about who I really was. I'd spent 8 months saving for the engagement ring that was burning a hole in my jacket pocket as I stood frozen in Miles' kitchen, listening to Paige tear apart everything I thought we'd built together. I teach emergency medical techniques at Austin Community College and volunteer with the local fire department, work that requires me to help people learn skills that literally save lives. For 3 years, I thought Paige understood that my career wasn't about money or status but about making a genuine difference in my community. I was wrong about everything. The conversation I overheard changed my entire understanding of our relationship and revealed just how completely I'd been deceived about the woman I thought I wanted to marry. Miles had invited both our friend groups to celebrate his new house in South Austin, and I'd been planning to use the party as the perfect opportunity to propose in front of everyone we cared about. The ring was a princess-cut solitaire that had taken me 8 months of careful budgeting to afford, something I'd chosen because Paige had once mentioned admiring a similar style in a jewelry store window. I'd coordinated with Miles to make sure all our friends would be there, planned to give a speech about finding someone who appreciated the work I do training future EMTs and paramedics, and even brought champagne to celebrate what I thought would be the best night of our lives. Instead, I found myself standing in the kitchen doorway listening to Paige explain to her real estate colleagues why she was embarrassed by my career choice and how she planned to push me towards something more ambitious after we got married. She was telling them that I was currently working as a fire captain rather than admitting I teach CPR and emergency response techniques to community college students and volunteers. The lies came so easily that I realized this wasn't the first time she'd misrepresented my work to make herself look better in professional social situations. Her colleague asked if I made good money in the fire department, and Paige laughed uncomfortably before explaining that we were still figuring things out financially but that she was confident she could motivate me to pursue leadership roles that came with better compensation packages. She described my current position as something I'd eventually outgrow once I realized that helping people didn't have to mean sacrificing financial success or professional recognition. The casual way she dismissed work that defined my entire sense of purpose felt like being gutted with surgical precision. I'd always known Paige was ambitious and image-conscious, traits I'd actually admired because they seemed to balance my more service-oriented perspective, but I never understood that she saw my dedication to emergency medical training as something fundamentally embarrassing rather than admirable. She continued explaining to her colleagues that she was dating someone in a transition period who just needed the right motivation to pursue more lucrative opportunities in corporate training or emergency management consulting. Every word revealed how completely she'd constructed a fantasy version of our future that had nothing to do with who I actually was or what I wanted from life. The woman I'd been planning to propose to saw my life's work as a temporary inconvenience rather than a calling worth respecting. I stood there holding champagne and an engagement ring while listening to her describe me as a project she intended to fix rather than a partner she genuinely loved and appreciated. The realization that she'd been lying to her professional network about my career for months made me understand that she'd never actually accepted who I was, just tolerated me while planning to reshape me into someone more acceptable to her social circle. I left the party without confronting her, walking to my converted ambulance that I'd bought used from the fire department and restored as both transportation and a mobile training unit for community emergency response workshops. The drive through empty Austin streets felt surreal as I processed the complete collapse of everything I'd believed about our relationship and my plans for proposing that night. The engagement ring sat in my pocket like evidence of how thoroughly I'd misunderstood the woman I thought I wanted to spend my life with, and I realized that the person I'd fallen in love with had never actually existed outside of my own hopeful imagination. For 5 days, I ignored every single one of Paige's increasingly frantic attempts to contact me while I threw myself into work at the college and picked up extra volunteer shifts at Station 19. Her messages evolved from confusion to panic as she apparently realized this wasn't just a temporary disagreement that would blow over after a few apologetic texts and promises to do better. I watched her digital desperation unfold through notifications I refused to answer, seeing her calls escalate from twice daily to every few hours, her voicemails growing longer and more emotional as she tried different approaches to get my attention. The woman who had never shown much interest in my work schedule suddenly seemed to have memorized exactly when my classes ended and when I'd be finishing my volunteer shifts, timing her attempts to coincide with moments when she thought I'd be most likely to respond. I found myself genuinely impressed by the dedication she was putting into trying to repair damage she didn't even realize she'd caused, since she had no idea I'd overheard her conversation about my embarrassing career and her plans to reshape my professional ambitions. Her first approach was confusion and concern, leaving voicemails wondering if something had happened to me and asking if I was feeling okay since I'd left Miles' party so suddenly without saying goodbye to anyone. When that didn't work, she shifted to mild irritation, suggesting that whatever was bothering me could be solved through adult conversation rather than silent treatment that was becoming increasingly childish and unfair to both of us. By day 3, genuine panic crept into her voice as she started mentioning specific plans we'd made for the upcoming weekend and asking whether I intended to honor commitments we'd discussed or if she should make alternative arrangements without me. The escalation continued when expensive flower arrangements started arriving at the community college with cards expressing her love and concern for my well-being, creating awkward conversations with my colleagues who wondered what kind of relationship drama warranted such elaborate public apologies. My department supervisor pulled me aside after the third delivery to ask if everything was all right at home, explaining that while he appreciated my increased dedication to work, the flower deliveries were becoming disruptive to the learning environment we tried to maintain for our students. I had to explain that I was going through a relationship situation that would resolve itself soon, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true given Paige's apparent determination to force a conversation through increasingly dramatic gestures. The situation reached new heights of desperation when she showed up at my duplex unannounced, standing on my doorstep with tears in her eyes and demanding to know what had happened between us and why I was treating her like a stranger after 3 years of what she called a loving, committed relationship. I watched through my window as she sat in her car for over an hour after I refused to answer the door, apparently hoping I'd eventually give in and come outside to discuss whatever had caused this sudden change in my behavior toward her. Her most concerning escalation came when she contacted my department supervisor directly, claiming to be worried about my mental health and suggesting that my sudden withdrawal from our relationship might indicate depression or some kind of emotional crisis requiring professional intervention. The phone call resulted in an uncomfortable meeting where I had to assure my boss that I was mentally stable and dealing with personal relationship issues that didn't affect my ability to teach emergency medical techniques or supervise training exercises effectively. Paige's final desperate attempt involved tracking down Miles at his construction job site, demanding to know what had happened at his party and insisting that someone must have said something terrible about her to cause such a dramatic shift in my attitude toward our relationship. Miles called me immediately after her visit to warn me that she seemed genuinely distraught and confused, asking whether I wanted him to explain what had actually happened or if I preferred to handle the situation myself without involving our mutual friends in relationship drama. I told him to stay out of it completely, since Paige's confusion about my behavior was actually proof that she had no idea how devastating her casual dismissal of my career had been to hear from someone who claimed to love and support me. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who had been embarrassed by my dedication to helping people was now desperately seeking help from everyone in my life to understand why I'd suddenly stopped responding to her attempts at communication and reconciliation. My colleagues at the fire station started noticing my intense focus on work and the extra shifts I'd been volunteering for, leading Captain Rodriguez to pull me aside and warn me that hiding at the station wouldn't solve whatever relationship problems I was trying to avoid dealing with directly. His advice proved prophetic as Paige's desperation continued reaching new heights throughout the week, including showing up at the fire station during one of my volunteer shifts and demanding that someone help her understand what kind of emergency had caused her boyfriend to completely disappear from their relationship without explanation or warning. Claire arrived unexpectedly at my duplex on a Tuesday evening with information that completely shattered any remaining doubt about whether I'd made the right decision walking away from her sister. I opened the door to find Paige's younger sister standing there with tears in her eyes and a manila folder clutched against her chest, looking like someone who'd been wrestling with a terrible secret for far too long and finally decided she couldn't stay silent anymore. Claire was pursuing her graduate degree in counseling psychology at UT Austin while working part-time at a crisis intervention center, giving her both the professional training and personal experience to recognize manipulation tactics that I'd been too emotionally invested to see clearly. She asked if she could come inside to share something important about Paige's behavior that she felt I needed to know before making any decisions about reconciliation, explaining that her sister's recent panicked phone calls had revealed information that changed everything about the situation I thought I was dealing with. I invited her in, offering coffee while she organized whatever evidence she'd brought, watching her struggle with the obvious conflict between family loyalty and what she clearly believed was the right thing to do for someone she'd watched being manipulated for months. The revelation she shared was devastating enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd been planning to marry and the relationship I'd believed we were building together over the past 3 years. Claire explained that Paige had been lying about her birth control for the past 2 months, secretly stopping her pills while taking fertility supplements she'd ordered online, planning to announce a pregnancy immediately after what she assumed would be my proposal at Miles' party. The calculated deception went far beyond anything I'd imagined, revealing a level of manipulation that made her embarrassment about my career seem almost insignificant compared to her willingness to trap me into marriage through reproductive coercion and lies about something as fundamental as family planning decisions. Claire had discovered the fertility supplements hidden in Paige's bathroom during a recent visit and confronted her sister about the deception, leading to an argument where Paige admitted her entire scheme to force my hand into marriage while simultaneously pushing me toward higher-paying career opportunities in corporate training or emergency management consulting. The revelation that Paige had been actively trying to get pregnant without my knowledge while planning to reshape my entire professional life made me realize that the woman I'd thought I loved had been systematically dismantling my autonomy in every major area of life. Claire's voice shook as she described watching her sister treat someone as genuinely caring and dedicated as me like a project to be managed rather than a partner to be respected, explaining how the situation had been torturing her for months because she'd developed feelings for me that she'd never been able to express. The confession about her own emotions added another layer of complexity to an already devastating conversation, but her obvious sincerity and the courage it had taken to come forward with information that would destroy her relationship with her sister made me appreciate her integrity in ways that highlighted everything Paige lacked. She showed me screenshots of text messages where Paige discussed her pregnancy timeline with friends, calculated the best timing for maximum emotional impact, and shared detailed plans for leveraging a baby to motivate me toward career changes that would provide better financial security for their hypothetical family. The evidence was overwhelming and methodical, revealing someone who had been treating our relationship like a business acquisition rather than a romantic partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection for each other as individuals. Claire explained that she'd been watching Paige manipulate situation after situation throughout our relationship, always finding ways to make me doubt my own judgment or feel guilty for prioritizing my calling to serve others over financial advancement opportunities that held no appeal for me personally. Her perspective as someone trained in recognizing psychological manipulation helped me understand that Paige's behavior wasn't just selfish or immature but represented a pattern of emotional abuse designed to undermine my confidence and reshape my identity to serve her vision of what our relationship should become. The most devastating part was realizing that Paige had been actively sabotaging my sense of self-worth while planning to trap me into a marriage where I'd be financially responsible for supporting someone who had no respect for the work that defined my sense of purpose and meaning in life. Claire's decision to risk her relationship with her sister to warn me about the pregnancy scheme demonstrated the kind of moral courage and genuine care that I'd been missing in my relationship with Paige, making me understand what it felt like to be with someone who actually supported my well-being rather than viewing me as a resource to be exploited. As we sat in my living room going through the evidence she'd compiled, I felt grateful for her honesty while also mourning the complete destruction of every positive memory I'd built with Paige over the past 3 years of what I'd believed was a loving, committed relationship. When Paige arrived at my duplex the next evening and discovered Claire's car in my driveway, the confrontation that followed exposed the full extent of her desperation and willingness to destroy her own family relationships to maintain control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond her ability to manage. I watched through my window as she sat in her car for several minutes, apparently trying to figure out why her sister would be visiting me when I'd been refusing to communicate with anyone connected to our relationship for over a week. The moment she walked through my front door and saw Claire sitting on my couch with evidence of her deceptions spread across my coffee table, something fundamental shifted in her demeanor from confused desperation to pure panic mixed with rage at what she clearly viewed as betrayal from someone she trusted to stay loyal regardless of circumstances. Her immediate response was to claim that Claire had been lying about everything and trying to sabotage our relationship out of jealousy, but when confronted with the actual screenshots and documentation that her sister had compiled, she switched tactics to something even more desperate and manipulative. Paige announced that the entire conversation was pointless because she was already pregnant with my child, making any discussion about birth control deception irrelevant since we were now dealing with the reality of an existing pregnancy that changed everything about our situation and future together. The claim hit like a physical blow, even though Claire had warned me that this might be Paige's final desperate attempt to salvage a relationship that was clearly collapsing under the weight of her own lies and manipulation tactics. I found myself staring at someone I'd thought I knew intimately, watching her weaponize the possibility of pregnancy to try to regain control over a conversation that was revealing truths she'd never intended me to discover about her character and intentions. Claire immediately challenged the claim with the professional skepticism of someone trained to recognize manipulation tactics, demanding that Paige provide proof of a pregnancy that seemed suspiciously timed to coincide with the exposure of her deception about trying to get pregnant without my knowledge or consent. The confrontation escalated into a screaming match between sisters that revealed years of underlying tension and competition, with Paige accusing Claire of jealousy and interference while Claire remained focused on protecting me from what she clearly recognized as another layer of manipulation designed to prevent accountability for previous lies. I insisted that we resolve the pregnancy question immediately through medical testing rather than allowing the claim to derail a conversation about trust and honesty that had already revealed fundamental incompatibilities in our values and relationship expectations. The trip to an urgent care clinic became one of the most surreal experiences of my life, sitting in a waiting room with two sisters who barely spoke to each other while waiting for blood tests that would either confirm a pregnancy or expose another lie in what was becoming an elaborate pattern of deception. The tension in that sterile room was overwhelming as we waited for results that would determine whether I was dealing with someone who had lied about pregnancy to manipulate me or someone who was actually carrying my child while having lied about everything else. When the medical assistant called us back with results showing that Paige was not pregnant, the relief I felt was immediately overshadowed by rage at the casual cruelty of using false pregnancy claims as a manipulation tactic in what was already an emotionally devastating situation. Paige's explanation that the fertility supplements had caused false positive results on home pregnancy tests felt like another calculated lie designed to minimize the psychological impact of her willingness to fake pregnancy as a relationship control mechanism. Under pressure from both Claire and me, she finally admitted to her elaborate scheme of trying to get pregnant before my expected proposal, believing that a baby would force me to commit to our relationship and pursue more lucrative career opportunities that would provide better financial security for what she'd already planned as our family. The medical confirmation that she'd been lying about pregnancy marked the complete collapse of any remaining trust between us, while Claire's protective instincts toward me became increasingly apparent to everyone in that clinical setting. The drive back to my duplex was conducted in complete silence, with Paige staring out the window like someone processing the complete destruction of every manipulation tactic she'd relied on to maintain control over our relationship dynamics. I realized that the woman sitting next to me had been willing to lie about pregnancy, manipulate birth control, and destroy her relationship with her sister rather than accept that I might choose to leave someone who had no respect for my career choices or personal autonomy in major life decisions. Paige's affluent parents arrived unannounced at my duplex 3 days later in their black BMW SUV, clearly expecting to discuss wedding plans and somehow resolve what they'd obviously been told was a minor relationship disagreement that could be smoothed over with parental intervention and practical financial planning. I watched through my window as investment banker Richard and interior designer Patricia surveyed my working-class East Austin neighborhood with obvious disdain, their luxury vehicle looking completely out of place among the modest duplex units and older trucks that defined my area's blue-collar character. They knocked on my door wearing expensive business attire and carrying themselves with the confident assumption that their wealth and social status would automatically command respect and allow them to control whatever conversation was about to unfold in my living room. Richard introduced himself with the kind of firm handshake that was supposed to communicate authority, while Patricia smiled with polite condescension as she examined my furniture and decorating choices, clearly forming judgments about my lifestyle and income level based on visual evidence of my priorities and spending habits. Their opening approach involved expressing concern about Paige's emotional state while suggesting that whatever misunderstanding had occurred between us could certainly be resolved through mature adult conversation that focused on practical considerations rather than temporary emotional reactions to minor relationship conflicts. I could see them mentally calculating the financial implications of my career choice and living situation, apparently viewing my dedication to emergency medical training as a character flaw that demonstrated poor judgment rather than a meaningful calling to serve my community through life-saving education and crisis response. Richard's attempt to take control of the conversation involved explaining that Paige had always been sensitive and prone to drama, but that she genuinely loved me and was committed to building a future together that would benefit both of us if I was willing to be reasonable about career advancement opportunities that could provide better financial security. Patricia chimed in with observations about how much Paige had matured during our relationship and how she'd learned to appreciate stability and commitment, suggesting that any recent difficulties were simply growing pains that occurred when couples began planning for marriage and long-term financial partnership. The condescending tone of their intervention became increasingly obvious as they explained that young people often had unrealistic expectations about love and compatibility, but that successful marriages were built on practical considerations like shared goals, financial planning, and mutual willingness to make compromises that benefited both partners equally. Their obvious belief that money could solve any relationship problem became clear when Richard suggested that perhaps I needed time to consider the advantages of joining their family, including potential business opportunities and connections that could help advance my career beyond the limited income potential of public service positions. I found myself watching two people who had clearly never considered that their daughter might be the problem in our relationship, automatically assuming that whatever conflict had occurred must stem from my unrealistic expectations or inability to appreciate the benefits of marrying into their social and economic circle. The conversation took an interesting turn when Claire arrived with her folder of evidence, apparently having arranged to meet me during her parents' visit to ensure they understood the full scope of what had actually transpired between Paige and me over the past several months. The shock on Richard and Patricia's faces when they realized their younger daughter was prepared to present documented evidence against her sister was immediately replaced by anger at what they clearly viewed as family betrayal and disloyalty that violated their expectations of sibling solidarity. Claire's calm presentation of the pregnancy scheme, birth control deception, and systematic lies about my career revealed information that her parents had clearly never suspected about their daughter's character and approach to relationships with people she claimed to love and respect. The evidence of Paige's manipulation tactics seemed to genuinely surprise Richard and Patricia, who had apparently accepted her version of events without questioning whether their daughter might be capable of the calculated deception that Claire's documentation clearly demonstrated through screenshots, text messages, and recorded conversations. Richard's response to learning about his daughter's lies was to suggest that perhaps the situation could be resolved through financial compensation for my time and emotional investment, offering to write a check that would help me move forward without pursuing any kind of public accountability that might damage Paige's reputation or career prospects in the real estate industry. The crude attempt to buy my silence backfired spectacularly when Claire forcefully defended my character and announced her own feelings for me, shocking her parents with the revelation that their supposedly successful daughter had systematically destroyed her relationship through lies while their younger daughter had found genuine love with someone who deserved respect and honesty. Patricia's horrified reaction to learning that both her daughters were emotionally involved with the same man was overshadowed by her obvious struggle to accept that Paige had been the manipulative party in a relationship they'd assumed was failing due to my inadequacy as a partner and provider. The family confrontation reached a breaking point when Claire presented evidence that Paige had been lying to her parents about my career, claiming I was a fire captain rather than admitting she was dating someone who taught emergency medical techniques at a community college and volunteered with local emergency services without compensation. 6 months later, Claire and I were engaged and collaborating on expanding my emergency medical training programs into a nonprofit organization that served at-risk youth throughout Austin, combining my EMT expertise with her counseling psychology background to create something meaningful that neither of us could have accomplished alone. We'd moved into a larger duplex in the same East Austin neighborhood that doubled as meeting space for support groups Claire facilitated for teenagers aging out of foster care, reflecting our shared commitment to helping vulnerable populations who needed practical life skills and emotional support during difficult transitions. The contrast between my relationship with Claire and what I'd experienced with Paige was stark enough to make me wonder how I'd ever convinced myself that constant criticism and financial pressure represented love rather than manipulation designed to undermine my confidence and reshape my identity. Claire appreciated my dedication to emergency medical education and saw my volunteer work as evidence of character rather than something embarrassing that needed to be hidden from her professional colleagues or social circle. Our engagement had developed naturally through months of working together on grant applications and curriculum development, discovering that we shared not only romantic attraction but genuine compatibility in values, goals, and approaches to building meaningful careers focused on service rather than personal advancement or financial accumulation. The nonprofit we'd established was providing free CPR and first aid certification to teenagers transitioning out of state care, giving them marketable skills while also teaching confidence and leadership abilities that would serve them throughout their lives regardless of whatever career paths they eventually chose to pursue. Claire's background in crisis intervention psychology perfectly complemented my emergency medical training, allowing us to address both the practical and emotional needs of young people who'd experienced trauma and instability throughout their formative years and needed adult mentors who genuinely cared about their well-being. We'd secured funding through grants Claire had written and community partnerships I'd developed through my work at the college and fire station, proving that two people with complementary skills could build something substantial when they actually supported each other's strengths rather than competing or trying to change fundamental aspects of each other's character. The work felt meaningful in ways that my relationship with Paige never had, probably because Claire and I were building something together rather than one person trying to reshape the other into a more acceptable version of themselves for social or financial reasons. Our personal relationship had grown stronger through the process of creating something larger than ourselves, giving us shared purpose and mutual respect that formed a foundation much more solid than physical attraction or convenient compatibility alone could provide. Claire's family had eventually accepted our relationship after witnessing how much happier and more confident she'd become working on projects that utilized her education and training in ways that actually helped people rather than just providing professional credentials. Meanwhile, Paige had relocated to San Diego where she was working for a luxury coastal real estate firm and dating a plastic surgeon, apparently finding the lifestyle-focused relationship she'd always wanted with someone who shared her priorities regarding income, status, and social positioning within affluent professional circles. According to mutual friends who occasionally provided updates, she seemed genuinely happy with her new situation and had stopped making any attempts to contact me once it became clear that Claire and I were serious about building a life together based on shared values rather than financial convenience or social expectations. The surprising development came through a letter Paige sent to both Claire and me acknowledging her manipulative behavior during our relationship and expressing what appeared to be genuine happiness about our engagement, suggesting that therapy had helped her recognize patterns of behavior that had been destructive to everyone involved, including herself. Her apology felt mature enough to suggest real personal growth, though I remained cautious about her motives given the calculated nature of her previous attempts to control situations through whatever tactics seemed most likely to produce desired outcomes. Claire was more optimistic about her sister's apparent transformation, pointing out that some people needed to lose everything they thought they wanted before discovering what actually made them happy, though she agreed that maintaining boundaries was important regardless of Paige's current emotional state. The letter had included acknowledgement that she'd never actually appreciated my work or understood why helping others mattered more to me than financial advancement, admitting that she'd been trying to change fundamental aspects of my character rather than accepting me as someone whose priorities were simply different from hers. Reading her recognition that our incompatibility had been fundamental rather than something that could be resolved through compromise or adjustment felt validating after months of questioning whether I'd been too inflexible or unrealistic in my expectations about mutual respect and support within romantic relationships. The most meaningful part was her acknowledgement that Claire and I were well suited for each other in ways that she and I had never been, demonstrating understanding that healthy relationships required genuine compatibility rather than just physical attraction and shared social circles. At our engagement party held in the Austin Community College training facility where I taught life-saving skills to future EMTs and paramedics, surrounded by the people who actually mattered in our lives, I proposed to Claire with a simple ring we'd chosen together rather than the expensive symbol that Paige had expected would represent my commitment to supporting her lifestyle and social aspirations. The venue perfectly captured who we were as individuals and as a couple, with training mannequins and emergency equipment serving as backdrop for a celebration that focused on authentic relationships rather than impressive displays of wealth or social status that meant nothing to either of us personally. My proposal speech focused on finding someone who loved me for my dedication to helping others rather than someone who saw that dedication as an obstacle to overcome through manipulation and pressure to pursue more lucrative career opportunities that held no appeal for me. I talked about discovering what it meant to be with someone who enhanced my best qualities instead of constantly criticizing my priorities and trying to reshape my identity to serve their vision of what our relationship should become for their benefit. The assembled guests included EMTs and firefighters I worked alongside, foster youth we mentored through our nonprofit programs, crisis center volunteers who collaborated with Claire on support groups, and mutual friends who had watched both relationships and could appreciate the contrast between authentic partnership and manipulative control. Miles gave a toast about watching Claire help me rediscover confidence that Paige's constant criticism had gradually destroyed over 3 years of being made to feel like my career choices represented personal failure rather than meaningful service to my community. His observations about how much happier and more relaxed I'd become since finding someone who appreciated my work rather than being embarrassed by it resonated with everyone who had witnessed the transformation from someone who constantly questioned his worth to someone secure in his choices and priorities. Captain Rodriguez spoke about the importance of finding a partner who enhanced rather than diminished your best qualities, drawing from his own experience with relationships that either supported or undermined professional dedication to emergency services and community safety. His speech emphasized how first responders needed partners who understood that helping others wasn't just a job but a calling that required emotional support rather than constant pressure to pursue different career paths for financial reasons. Claire's response to my proposal was everything Paige's reaction would never have been, focused on our shared future helping vulnerable populations rather than excitement about wedding planning or social media opportunities to display engagement ring photos for maximum social impact. She talked about feeling grateful to build a life with someone whose values aligned with hers, someone who saw community service as meaningful work rather than something to be tolerated temporarily before pursuing more ambitious professional goals. The celebration continued with stories from teenagers who had benefited from our programs, sharing how learning emergency medical skills had given them confidence and practical abilities that extended far beyond CPR certification into general life skills and leadership development that would serve them regardless of their eventual career choices. Their testimonials about feeling valued and supported by adults who genuinely cared about their success created the kind of meaningful atmosphere that no expensive wedding venue could have provided, highlighting the real impact of work that prioritized service over personal advancement or financial gain. The contrast between this authentic celebration and what Paige's hypothetical engagement party would have been was striking enough to make me grateful for every painful moment of discovering her true character and priorities before making the mistake of marrying someone fundamentally incompatible with my values and life goals. Instead of focusing on impressive details designed for social media documentation, our engagement party represented genuine community built around shared purpose and mutual support rather than superficial connections based on status or financial positioning within professional or social hierarchies. The evening concluded with Claire and me discussing plans for expanding our nonprofit work into additional communities throughout Texas, Combining emergency medical training with counseling support for at-risk youth who needed both practical skills and emotional guidance during difficult transitions in their lives. Our engagement represented not just personal happiness but also professional collaboration that allowed both of us to pursue meaningful work that utilized our education and training in ways that actually helped vulnerable populations rather than simply providing career advancement or financial security. Looking around at the people celebrating with us, I realized that this was what love actually looked like when it was built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine appreciation for each other's character rather than attempts to change fundamental aspects of personality or priorities to serve someone else's vision of what a relationship should provide for their benefit.